The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty streets of downtown Chicago. Henry Washington pulled his old jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked home from the grocery store. At 73 years old, he moved slower than he used to, but his back was still straight and his eyes were still sharp. The plastic bags in his hands held enough food for the week: bread, milk, some vegetables, and the coffee his doctor told him to stop drinking, but never would. Chicago looked different these days. 20 years had passed since the aliens came to Earth. They called it the Great Integration. Humanity joined something called the Galactic Federation. Most people thought it was the best thing that ever happened to the human race. Contact with advanced alien civilizations, new technology, peace across the stars. Henry knew better. He had lived through enough history to recognize occupation when he saw it. The aliens called themselves peacekeepers, but they were really just cops with better weapons and worse attitudes. They patrolled human cities in their blue uniforms, keeping order the way they saw fit. Their way was usually the hard way. The Zephyrians were the worst of the bunch. They stood 8 feet tall with blue scales covering their bodies like natural armor. They had 4 arms, each one strong enough to crush a human skull. Their eyes were yellow and cold, like a snake deciding whether you were worth biting. They walked through human neighborhoods like they owned the place, because they did. Henry turned the corner onto State Street. The sidewalk was cracked and old. The city had stopped fixing things like that after the integration. Why waste money on roads when the aliens had flying cars? Why repair buildings when alien technology could do it better? Humans were supposed to be grateful for alien guidance. They were supposed to smile and say, "Thank you for being civilized." 3 Zephyrian officers stood near the old bank building. Commander Vex was the tallest one, with darker scales and more scars across his face. Lieutenant Koros had lighter coloring and moved with quick, nervous energy. Sergeant Thane was the youngest, barely out of whatever passed for Alien Police Academy. All 3 wore energy weapons on their belts and expressions that said they were looking for trouble. Henry tried to walk past them without making eye contact. He had learned that lesson the hard way over the years. Don't look at them. Don't speak unless spoken to. Move quickly but not too quickly. Show respect but not fear. It was a delicate balance that most humans had mastered by now. "Human," Commander Vex called out in his rough voice. "Stop where you are." Henry stopped walking. His hands tightened on the grocery bags. "Yes, officer." "What are you doing in this area?" Vex stepped closer. His yellow eyes looked Henry up and down like he was examining a piece of garbage. "Going home, sir. I live 6 blocks that way." Henry nodded toward his apartment building. "Show me identification." Henry set down his grocery bags carefully and reached into his jacket pocket. His hands were steady, despite the fear growing in his chest. He pulled out his identification card and held it out. Vex snatched it away and looked at it for a long time. Henry Washington, age 73, retired engineer. Vex's voice was flat and bored. "What kind of engineering?" "Structural engineering, sir. I worked on buildings and bridges." "Before the integration?" "Yes, sir." Vex handed the card back with a sharp movement that made Henry flinch. "Your people built things poorly. Weak materials. Bad design. Everything falls apart." Henry said nothing. There was nothing safe to say to that. Lieutenant Koros moved closer from the left side. He was walking suspiciously, watching us. "I wasn't watching anyone," Henry said quietly. "I was just going home." "Are you calling my officer a liar?" Commander Vex stepped forward until he was towering over Henry. The old man had to crane his neck back to look up at the alien's face. "No, sir. I'm not calling anyone anything." "Your tone is disrespectful," Sergeant Thane said from the right side. Now Henry was surrounded by all 3 of them. "You're showing aggressive behavior toward Federation peacekeepers." Henry felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. This was going wrong fast. He had seen this happen to other humans. It never ended well. "I apologize if I seemed disrespectful. That wasn't my intention." "Intention doesn't matter," Vex said. His hand moved to rest on his energy weapon. What matters is behavior, and your behavior is threatening. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm an old man carrying groceries. Old humans are often the most dangerous, Koro said with a laugh that sounded like grinding metal. They remember the time before civilization, before we taught you how to behave. Henry's jaw tightened slightly. That was a mistake. Vex saw the change in his expression immediately. There it is, the commander said with satisfaction. The real face of humanity, violent, angry, ready to fight. I'm not fighting anyone. But you want to. I can see it in your eyes. This is why your species needs guidance. This is why we're here. Vex pulled out his energy baton. The weapon hummed to life with a blue glow that cast strange shadows on the cracked sidewalk. Turn around and put your hands on the wall. For what? For threatening Federation officers? I didn't threaten anyone. Turn around now or this gets worse for you. Henry looked around the empty street. No other humans were nearby. No witnesses, except the security cameras that the aliens controlled. He was alone with 3 creatures who could kill him without breaking a sweat and face no consequences for it. He turned around and put his hands on the cold brick wall of the bank building. The grocery bag sat forgotten on the sidewalk beside his feet. This is how it should be, Vex said quietly. Humans in their proper place. That was when the first blow landed across Henry's back. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, Captain Jake Washington stood in the command center of a facility that officially did not exist. The room was filled with screens showing data streams from across the galaxy. Holographic displays, rotated slowly in the air, showing star maps and fleet positions that would make alien military commanders lose sleep if they knew humans possessed such information. Jake was 35 years old with dark skin like his father and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple black uniform with no visible rank insignia. The people around him knew exactly who he was and what he could do. That was enough. His hands moved across a control panel, reviewing reports from human colonies that the aliens believed were empty asteroids. The communication device on his wrist buzzed. Jake glanced at the caller identification and smiled. His father always called at the same time every week. Right on schedule. Hey, Dad, how are you doing? Jake said as he accepted the call. His voice was warm and relaxed. Around him, technicians continued their work monitoring alien communications and tracking Federation fleet movements. The voice that came through the speaker was not the strong, steady voice Jake expected to hear. It was broken and weak, barely, above a whisper. Son, they hurt me real bad this time. I think it's time. Jake's entire body went still. The smile disappeared from his face. His free hand moved to a red switch on the control panel in front of him, but he did not flip it yet. Dad, where are you right now? Hospital, Chicago General. The alien doctors fixed what they could, but Jake... Henry's voice broke completely. They beat me with those energy sticks. Said I was threatening them. I was just walking home from the store. Every person in the command center had stopped what they were doing. They could hear the pain in the old man's voice through Jake's communicator. They could see the change in their captain's expression. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dad, I need you to stay on the line with me. Don't hang up, okay? Jake's voice was perfectly calm, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of the console. Tell me exactly what happened. As Henry spoke, Jake's other hand moved across his control panel. Screens around the room began displaying street camera footage from Chicago. Facial recognition systems identified the 3 Zephyrian officers involved. Background files appeared showing their service records, home addresses, daily routines, and psychological profiles. 3 of them, Henry whispered. Commander Vex, Lieutenant Koros, and Sergeant Thane. They said humans need to learn their place. They laughed while they did it, Jake. They actually laughed. Jake reached over and flipped the red switch. Alarms began sounding throughout the hidden facility. Not loud emergency alarms, but quiet tones that meant something had changed. Something important. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks appeared at Jake's shoulder. She was a tall woman with short blonde hair and scars on her hands from years of weapons training. "Sir, Delta protocols?" "Delta protocols are active," Jake said without taking his eyes off the screen showing the 3 alien officers. "This is not a drill." Lisa's fingers began moving across her own control panel. Across the facility, soldiers in black armor began checking weapons and loading onto transport ships that could cross continents in minutes. These were not normal human soldiers. They were faster, stronger, and smarter than baseline humans. They had been training for this day since childhood. "Dad, help is coming," Jake said into his communicator. "I need you to stay in the hospital where it's safe. Don't talk to any alien officers. Don't sign any statements. Just rest and get better." "Jake, you don't understand. They have all the power. They control everything. There's nothing you can do against them." Jake looked around the command center. Screens showed human warships hidden throughout the solar system, advanced weapons that could punch holes through planets, defense networks that monitored every alien ship within 50 light-years of Earth, technology that made the Galactic Federation's military look like children playing with toys. "Dad, there are some things I never told you about my job." Sergeant Alex Kane approached from the tactical station. He was a short, stocky man with cybernetic implants behind his ears that connected directly to the facility's targeting systems. "Sir, we have full surveillance on all 3 targets. Commander Vex is at the precinct filing a false report. Lieutenant Koros is at his apartment. Sergeant Thane is at a bar celebrating with other officers." Jake nodded. "Prep Delta Teams 1 through 5. Full gear non-lethal takedown protocols. I want them taken alive and unharmed. We're going to have a conversation." "Sir," Lisa said carefully, "once we activate the teams, there's no going back. The aliens will know we exist. They'll know what we're capable of." Jake looked at the screen, showing his father's medical records. Broken ribs, internal bleeding, severe bruising, a 73-year-old man beaten nearly to death for walking home with groceries. "Good," Jake said. His voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the command center. It's time they knew. The facility transformed around him, blast doors sealed shut, hidden weapon systems activated. Communication arrays began broadcasting coded signals to human colonies across the galaxy. After 20 years of hiding, pretending to be weak and helpless, humanity was about to show its true face. Jake spoke into his communicator again. "Dad, I want you to know that what happened to you today is going to change everything. Those 3 aliens who hurt you are going to learn something about humans that the galaxy forgot a long time ago." "What's that, son?" Jake smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator that had been hiding in tall grass, watching its prey wander closer and closer to the trap. "We don't forgive, and we never forget." Across the facility, transport ships loaded with Delta teams began launching toward Chicago. In space, human warships that had been disguised as asteroids and debris began powering up their weapon systems. On colonies throughout the galaxy, human forces received activation codes they had been waiting 20 years to hear. The hunting season was about to begin. Commander Vex sat behind his desk at the Zephyrian precinct, filling out paperwork about the morning's incident. His report was simple and clean. An elderly human male had displayed aggressive behavior toward Federation peacekeepers. The subject had been subdued using appropriate force. No permanent damage had been inflicted. The human had been transported to medical facilities for minor injuries. It was all lies, but the lies would become truth once they entered the official records. That was how the system worked. Humans complained sometimes, but their complaints disappeared into bureaucratic systems that led nowhere. The Federation had more important things to worry about than the hurt feelings of primitive species. Vex finished typing and leaned back in his chair. Through the window of his office, he could see the city skyline. Chicago looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight. Humans went about their daily business, following the rules, staying out of trouble. It was exactly how a civilized society should function. The lights in his office went out. Vex frowned and reached for the power controls on his desk. Nothing happened when he pressed the switches. Emergency lighting should have activated automatically, but the room remained dark. The only illumination came from the sunlight streaming through his window. "Electrical problem," he muttered in his native language. He stood up and walked toward the door to call for maintenance. Something moved in the shadows near the corner of the room. Vex spun around, his hand automatically reaching for the plasma rifle mounted on the wall behind his desk. His enhanced vision could see clearly in low-light conditions, but the corner of the room seemed somehow darker than it should be, like the shadows were thicker there. "Security alert," he said loudly. His voice should have activated the building's communication system. Nothing happened. No response came through the speakers in his office. The shadow in the corner moved again. This time, Vex saw what it was. A human male, dressed in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect. The figure was smaller than Vex by several feet, but something about the way he stood made the alien commander take a step backward. "My name is Captain Jake Washington," the human said in a quiet voice. "The elderly man you beat this morning is my father." Vex lunged for his plasma rifle. His forearms moved with trained precision, faster than any human should be able to react. His fingers closed around the weapon's grip. The rifle exploded in his hands. Pieces of melted metal and plastic scattered across the office floor. Vex stared at his empty hands in shock. The human had moved so quickly that Vex had not even seen him act. One moment the rifle was there. The next, it was destroyed. "How?" Vex whispered. Jake stepped out of the corner shadows. His armor was smooth and seamless, like it had been grown rather than manufactured. No visible weapons, no equipment that Vex could identify. Just a human male who had somehow disabled the building's power, communications, and security systems, without making a sound. "Sit down," Jake said. Vex remained standing. He was 8 feet tall with natural armor plating and 4 arms designed for combat. He was not going to be intimidated by a single human. "You're making a mistake, human. I'm a Federation officer. Attacking me is a crime punishable by death." Jake moved again. This time Vex tried to track the motion with his enhanced vision. The human seemed to flicker, like he was moving between spaces rather than through them. Pain exploded through Vex's legs as something struck him behind the knees. He collapsed onto the floor, unable to stand. I said, "Sit down." Jake was standing beside Vex's desk now, completely relaxed. "We need to talk." Across the city, Lieutenant Koros was in his apartment watching Federation news broadcasts on his wall screen. The reports were all positive. Trade agreements with new species. Successful peacekeeping operations on frontier worlds. The continued progress of civilizing primitive races like humanity. His apartment was on the 15th floor of a building reserved for Federation personnel. High security, multiple locks, surveillance systems that monitored every approach. Koros felt completely safe there. Humans could not fly, and they certainly could not reach his apartment without being detected. The wall screen turned off. Koros stood up from his chair and walked over to check the power connection. Everything seemed normal. He pressed the power button several times, but nothing happened. Then he noticed that all the lights in his apartment had gone out as well. Behind him, a voice spoke in perfect Zephyrian. "Good evening, Lieutenant." Koros spun around. A human female stood in his living room, wearing the same strange black armor he had heard rumors about in military briefings. Her skin was dark, her hair was short, and her eyes were cold as winter stars. "How did you get in here?" Koros demanded. His hand moved toward the energy weapon on his belt. "I walked through the front door," the woman said. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks. I'm here about Henry Washington." Koros drew his weapon and fired. The energy bolt should have burned a hole through the human's chest. Instead, it struck some kind of energy field around her body and scattered harmlessly. Lisa did not even flinch. "That was rude," she said. Koros fired again and again. Each shot was absorbed by the invisible shield surrounding the human woman. His weapon's power cell was draining rapidly, but he could not stop shooting. Terror had taken control of his actions. The weapon clicked empty. Lisa walked forward and gently took it from his shaking hands. "Much better," she said. "Now we can have a civilized conversation." On the other side of Chicago, Sergeant Thane was celebrating at Murphy's bar with 3 other Zephyrian officers. They were drinking synthetic alcohol and laughing about the morning's excitement. The story of the beaten human had grown more dramatic with each telling. "You should have seen the old fool's face," Thane said, gesturing with his drink. "Thought he could stare down Federation officers. Learned his lesson quickly enough." The other officers laughed. Several human customers in the bar looked uncomfortable, but they said nothing. They minded their own business and kept their heads down, just as they had been taught. The bar's lights flickered once, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow. The human customers began moving toward the exits quickly but quietly. They knew something was wrong, and they did not want to be caught in the middle of it. "Power failure," one of the other officers said. "These human buildings are so poorly maintained." Thane nodded and took another drink. Then he noticed that the humans were all gone. Every single civilian had left the bar. Only the 4 Zephyrian officers remained, sitting at their table in the red emergency lighting. A figure in black armor materialized at the bar's entrance. Then another appeared near the back exit. A third dropped from the ceiling like he had been hanging there invisible. Within seconds, the 4 alien officers were surrounded by humans who had appeared from nowhere. "Gentlemen," one of the humans said. His voice was calm and professional. "My name is Sergeant Alex Kane. We're here to discuss your treatment of elderly civilians." Thane reached for his weapon. His hand never made it to his belt. Something struck his wrist with enough force to break bone. He cried out in pain and clutched his injured arm. "Sergeant Thane," Alex continued, "you are under arrest for assault, filing false reports, and conduct unbecoming a peacekeeping officer. You have the right to remain silent, but I doubt you will use it." The 3 human soldiers moved forward with coordinated precision. The Zephyrian officers, despite their size and strength advantage, found themselves overpowered and restrained. Within moments, their weapons were removed, their communications devices were disabled, and their hands were secured behind their backs with restraints they could not break. "Where are you taking us?" one of the officers demanded. Alex smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. "To meet someone who wants to ask you a few questions about Henry Washington." The interrogation room was deep underground, carved from solid rock and lined with metal that blocked all forms of communication. Commander Vex, Lieutenant Koros, and Sergeant Thane sat in chairs that had been built to hold creatures much stronger than humans. The restraints around their wrists and ankles were made from materials they could not identify, but they knew with certainty that breaking free was impossible. The 3 Zephyrian officers had been transported here separately, each one blindfolded during the journey. They had no idea where they were or how long they had been traveling. The room had no windows, no clocks, and no way to measure the passage of time. The only light came from panels in the ceiling that cast everything in harsh white illumination. Vex's scales had lost their vibrant blue color. They were pale and dull now, the way Zephyrian skin looked when fear took hold. Koros kept looking around the room frantically, searching for escape routes that did not exist. Thane was the youngest of the 3, and he was shaking so badly that his chair rattled against the floor. The door opened with a soft hiss. Jake Washington entered the room wearing the same black armor they had seen during their capture. He moved, with quiet confidence like he owned every space he entered. Behind him came Lisa Brooks and Alex Kane, both carrying devices that looked like data tablets but hummed with power the aliens could not recognize. Jake pulled up a 4th chair and sat down across from the 3 prisoners. He was so much smaller than them, barely reaching their shoulder height even when they were sitting down. But something in his eyes made all 3 aliens want to look away. "Gentlemen," Jake said politely, "thank you for accepting our invitation." "This is kidnapping," Vex said, trying to make his voice sound authoritative. "The Federation will not tolerate attacks on peacekeeping personnel." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "The Federation? Yes, let's talk about them." He gestured to Lisa, who, activated her device. A holographic projector rose from the center of the table, filling the air above them with images. The first image showed a massive starship unlike anything the Zephyrian officers had ever seen. It was sleek and deadly, bristling with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. The hull was black as space itself, and it moved through the stars without making any detectable energy signature. "This is the Earth defense ship Liberty," Jake explained calmly. "She's currently positioned 3 light years from the Federation capital world. Her main weapons can crack a planet's crust from this distance." More images appeared. Dozens of ships, each one more advanced than anything in the Federation fleet, space stations that looked like cities floating among the asteroids. Weapons platforms that monitored every major trade route in the galaxy. Koro stared at the images with his mouth open. "Impossible. Humans don't have this technology. Your species barely achieved spaceflight when we found you." Jake smiled. "We achieved spaceflight 400 years before you found us, Lieutenant. We just let you think we were primitive because it was convenient." The images changed again. Now they showed human colonies on worlds the Federation believed were uninhabited. Cities under domes on airless moons. Mining operations in asteroid belts that Federation scouts had marked as empty space. Humans were everywhere, hidden in plain sight. "For 20 years, Jake continued, while your people treated us like children who needed guidance, we were building the largest military force this galaxy has ever seen. Every time one of your officers filed a report about human compliance, our engineers were designing better weapons. Every time your diplomats praised our peaceful nature, our tacticians were planning for war." Sergeant Thane finally found his voice. "The Federation has thousands of worlds, millions of ships. You cannot fight all of us." Alex Kane leaned forward from his position near the wall. "Actually, we've been monitoring your military capabilities for decades. Would you like to see the analysis?" New images filled the holographic display. Fleet positions, supply lines, strategic weaknesses. The 3 aliens watched in growing horror as their entire military structure was laid bare. Every ship, every base, every defensive position was marked and cataloged. "Your civil war in the Outer Rim has left your eastern fleets depleted," Lisa said, reading from her tablet. "The resource shortages in the core worlds mean your shipyards are operating at 30% capacity. Your military is stretched thin, across too many fronts, and half your commanders are more interested in politics than strategy." Jake stood up and walked around the table. The 3 aliens turned their heads to follow him, unable to look away. "The truth is, gentlemen, we could have conquered the Federation any time in the last 10 years. Your entire civilization exists because we allow it to exist." "Then why?" Vex whispered. "Why hide? Why pretend to be weak?" Jake stopped walking and looked directly at him. "Because we're not conquerors. We're defenders. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We just want to be left alone to live our lives in peace." He returned to his chair and sat down again. "But you couldn't let us have that, could you? You had to keep pushing, keep testing, keep reminding us that we were inferior species who needed your guidance." The holographic display changed one more time. Now it showed security footage from that morning. Henry Washington walking home from the grocery store. The 3 Zephyrian officers surrounding him. The beating that followed. "This is my father," Jake said quietly. 73 years old. A structural engineer who helped design the first human space stations. A man who fought in 3 wars to defend his people. A grandfather who just wanted to buy groceries and go home. The aliens watched the footage in silence. They saw themselves laughing as they beat the old man. They heard their own voices making jokes about teaching humans their place. "Do you know what my father did during the Titan Wars?" Jake asked. "He designed the defense systems that saved 12 million people when the Centauri Empire tried to glass our colonies. He's a hero to every human in this galaxy." Jake leaned forward and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "And you beat him unconscious for walking on a public sidewalk." Koros was crying now, though he tried to hide it. Zephyrians did not cry often, but terror had broken through his emotional controls. "We didn't know. We thought he was just another human. We were following protocols." "Protocols?" Jake repeated. Yes, let's discuss protocols. He gestured to Alex, who brought up new images. These showed incidents from across the galaxy. Humans being beaten, arrested, humiliated by Federation. Peacekeepers. Thousands of cases all filed away and forgotten. For 20 years we've been keeping records. Every assault, every false arrest, every time one of your people decided to remind a human of their place in the galactic order. Jake's voice was perfectly calm, but there was something underneath it that made the aliens want to run. We have names, dates, locations, and evidence for every single incident. What do you want from us? Vex asked. Jake smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. I want you to carry a message back to your superiors. The age of human submission is over. We're withdrawing from the Federation effective immediately. And if any alien force ever sets foot on a human world again without our permission, they will discover exactly what 20 years of hidden preparation can accomplish. He stood up and walked toward the door. Oh, and gentlemen, the next time you see an elderly human walking down a street, you might want to remember that his son could be someone like me. The door closed behind him with a final, echoing sound. The three Zephyrian officers sat alone in the white room, staring at the holographic images that still floated above the table. Images of human warships that could destroy worlds. Images of weapons that could crack stars. Images of a species that had been pretending to be sheep while they built themselves into wolves. In the silence that followed, they began to understand that the galaxy was about to change forever. 3 days after the capture, news networks across Earth erupted with the story that would change everything. The security footage of Henry Washington's beating had been leaked to every major human news outlet simultaneously. The video spread through social networks faster than any story in human history. Within hours, every person on Earth had seen the brutal attack. The footage was crystal clear. 3 massive Zephyrian officers surrounding a frail elderly man. The old man's polite responses to their aggressive questions. The moment when Commander Vex drew his energy baton and began the beating. Henry's broken body lying on the sidewalk while the aliens laughed and walked away. Humans who had spent 20 years accepting alien authority suddenly found their voices. Protests erupted in every major city on Earth. Signs reading, "Remember," Henry Washington appeared on street corners. Videos of other alien brutalities stored in secret for years began surfacing online. The anger that humans had been swallowing for 2 decades finally exploded into the open. Federation officials tried to contain the situation. They issued statements claiming the footage had been altered. They said Henry Washington had attacked. The officers first, they promised investigations and reforms. But their lies fell apart when more videos appeared, showing the incident from multiple angles, all telling the same story. Jake stood in his father's hospital room, watching the news coverage on the wall screen. Henry was sitting up in bed, looking healthier than he had in years. Human medical technology had healed his injuries completely, rebuilding damaged tissue and strengthening bones that had been weakened by age. He looked like a man in his 50s rather than his 70s. "The whole galaxy is talking about you, Dad," Jake said with a smile. Henry shook his head. "They should be talking about you and your people. What you've built down there is amazing. All those ships, all that technology. How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day the aliens arrived. Some of us knew it was just another form of conquest. We decided to be ready when the mask finally came off." On the screen, Federation Ambassador Quellen was giving a press conference, trying to calm the growing human unrest. His blue skin looked pale under the harsh lights, and his usual confidence was nowhere to be seen. Behind him stood a full security detail of human and alien guards, something that had never been necessary before. "The Federation regrets this unfortunate incident," Quellen said in his translated voice. "The officers involved will face appropriate disciplinary action. We remain committed to peaceful coexistence with humanity." The human reporters in the audience were not satisfied with diplomatic words. They shouted questions about other incidents, demanded real punishment for the officers, and called for immediate reforms. The ambassador's answers became shorter and more defensive with each question. Jake turned off the sound and looked at his father. How do you feel about all this? About what's going to happen next? Henry was quiet for a moment, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. I've lived through a lot of changes, son. I've seen humanity rise and fall and rise again, but I never thought I'd live to see the day when we stopped pretending to be weak. A soft knock came at the door. Lisa Brooks entered, carrying a data tablet and wearing her dress uniform instead of combat armor. Sir, the transport is ready. The 3 prisoners have been prepared for release. Jake nodded. How are they handling the revelation? About as well as you'd expect. Commander Vex hasn't spoken since yesterday. Lieutenant Koros keeps asking if we're really going to let them go. Sergeant Thane has been writing what looks like a confession. Good. They understand the message then. Henry looked between his son and Lisa. You're really going to release them? After what they did? Jake walked over to the window and looked down at the street where protesters were gathering. Humans carrying signs and chanting slogans about freedom and dignity. Dad, killing them would make us conquerors. Releasing them makes us something more dangerous. What's that? Jake turned back to his father. It makes us unpredictable. An hour later, the 3 Zephyrian officers stood in a transport vehicle that was taking them back to their precinct. They had been blindfolded again during the journey, but now they could see the streets of Chicago through the armored windows. Thousands of humans filled the sidewalks and intersections. The protests had grown beyond anything the Federation had seen before. Commander Vex watched the crowds with growing unease. These humans looked different than they had 3 days ago. They stood straighter. They moved with purpose. They looked directly at alien peacekeepers instead of avoiding eye contact. Something fundamental had changed in the way humans saw themselves and their place in the galaxy. The transport stopped in front of the precinct building. Federation security forces had established a perimeter, but it looked fragile against the sea of angry humanity surrounding it. The 3 officers were escorted inside under heavy guard, past protesters who shouted questions and demands for justice. Once inside, they were taken to a briefing room where Federation military command was waiting. Admiral Zorak, the sector commander, looked at them with cold yellow eyes. His scales were darker than usual, a sign of stress among his species. Report, he said simply. Vex stood at attention, but his voice shook as he spoke. Sir, we were captured by human military forces. Advanced human military forces. They showed us intelligence about Federation fleet positions, supply lines, and strategic capabilities. They have technology we have never seen before. Impossible. Human technology is decades behind ours. No, sir, it isn't. Vex placed a small device on the table. They gave me this to show you. Admiral Zorak picked up the device. It activated automatically, projecting a holographic image into the air. The image showed a human warship hanging in space directly above the Federation, Capital World. The ship was massive, bristling with weapons and completely invisible to the planet's detection systems. This is the Earth Defense Ship Constitution, a recorded voice said. It was Jake's voice, calm and professional. She has been monitoring your capital for the past 6 months. Her current target lock is on the Federation Council building. This message will repeat every hour until humanity receives an official apology for the assault on Henry Washington and confirmation of our withdrawal from Federation oversight. The hologram flickered and disappeared. Admiral Zorak stared at the device with the same expression Vex had worn 3 days ago. The expression of someone whose entire understanding of reality had just collapsed. How many ships do they have? He whispered. Lieutenant Koros answered. Hundreds, sir. Maybe thousands. They've been building them for 20 years while we thought. They were grateful for our guidance. Sergeant Thane stepped forward. Sir, there's something else. They said they've been monitoring every incident of Federation personnel assaulting humans. They have records going back 20 years. Names, dates, evidence. Admiral Zorak sat down heavily in his chair. Around the galaxy, similar conversations were happening in Federation command centers as the truth spread. Humanity was not the primitive, peaceful species they had believed. Humans were apex predators who had been hiding their true nature until someone pushed them too far. On Earth, Jake stood in his father's hospital room. watching Federation ships begin withdrawing from human space. The withdrawal was quiet and professional, with no official announcements or explanations. But every human on the planet could see the alien vessels departing through the atmosphere. "Is it over?" Henry asked. Jake shook his head. "No, Dad. It's just beginning. The galaxy is about to learn what humans are really capable of when we stop pretending to be sheep." Outside the window, human crowds cheered as the last Federation patrol ship disappeared into the sky. After 20 years of occupation disguised as guidance, humanity was finally free to be itself again. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if they knew that something fundamental had changed in the balance of galactic power. The age of human submission was over. The age of human dominance was about to begin.